Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is a Tuesday in this roasty, toasty May, and welcome to Brother Bedtime. Oh boy, I'm Colin, and there's some reality peeking out over here. It's bedtime, everybody. Hi, welcome. How was your day? I got to do some grocery shopping, which was very exciting, and I made some aforementioned smokies on the barbecue. I've been hankering a good sausage for a while now, so I got my fill of that tonight. And this evening's beverage on my end of things is a nice hot cup of green tea to help with digestion. Exquisite. Today we will be continuing on with our foray into the newest, that's not the newest, it's the newest to us, book of the Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis, the fourth in the series, Prince Caspian. I want to show off the cover art again because it's rather baller. There's some giant in the back. There's a guy with a cool crew cut hanging out with him. And everybody is swords and shields, along with one guy tooting a horn right in the middle of the page. Last we left our heroes, the Pevensey children, who, those of you that were here for the Chronicles of Narnia's second book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, you will recognize these four children, Peter, Lucy, Susan, and Edmund, as the protagonists of that yarn. And they appear to be the protagonists of this particular yarn as well. They were all chilling at the train station, waiting for the steam engines to come and take them away to boarding school for the semester. And they're all feeling a bit down in the dumps about it, when suddenly they felt this wretched pulling feeling, and when they opened their eyes, they found themselves on a mysterious wooded island. And they spent some time splashing about in the water and hunting for crabs and shellfish and the like. But eventually reality set in and they had to go and find some food and some water, which they did. They made their way inland and found a mysterious orchard in the middle of some great ruined castle, which it was shortly revealed to be the old castle that they reigned from, Cair Paravel, the kingdom by the sea. They found some of their old treasures, Peter and his sword. Actually, there's a killer picture here that I want to show you again. Peter and his sword and shield. Lucy's got her vial of healing goodness, the tasty gumdrops of magical restoration. and Lucy's somewhere, Susan is kicking around somewhere in there with the bow. Sadly, the Horn of Gondor was lost when the children came back to England for the first time. However, their demeanor has already begun to shift, and they're feeling more like their regal selves than the English school children when they first showed up. So we press on today with Chapter 3, and time depending, maybe Chapter 4. So sit back, relax, and enjoy Chapter 3, The Dwarf. The worst of sleeping out of doors is that you wake up so dreadfully early. And when you wake, you have to get up because the ground is so hard that you are uncomfortable. And it makes matters worse if there is nothing but apples for breakfast, and you have had nothing but apples for supper the night before. When Lucy had said, truly enough, that it was a glorious morning, there did not seem to be anything else nice to be said. Edmund said what everyone was feeling. We've simply got to get off this island. When they had drunk from the well and splashed their faces, they all went down to the stream again to the shore, and stared at the channel which divided them from the mainland. We'll have to swim, said Edmund. It would be all right for Sue, said Peter. Susan had won prizes for swimming at school, but I don't know about the rest of us. By the rest of us, he really meant Edmund, who couldn't yet do 2 lengths at the school baths, and Lucy, who could hardly swim at all. Anyway, said Susan, there might be currents. Father said it's never wise to bathe in a place you don't know. Those are wise words, Susan's father, who, as far as I'm aware, this is the first time we've heard mention of any of the Pevensey children's parents. Remarkable. I wonder what happened to them. But, Peter, said Lucy, look here. I know I can't swim for nuts at home in England, but couldn't we all swim long ago, if it was long ago, when we were kings and queens in Narnia? We could ride then, too, and do all sorts of things. Don't you think— Ah, but we were sort of grown up then, said Peter. We reigned for years and years and learned to do things. Aren't we just back at our proper ages again now? Oh, said Edmund, in a voice which made everyone stop talking and listen to him. "I've just seen it all," he said. "Seen what?" asked Peter. "Why, the whole thing," said Edmund. "You know what we were puzzling about last night? That it was only a year ago since we left Narnia, but everything looks as if no one had lived in Cair Paravel for hundreds of years. Well, don't you see? You know that, however long we seem to have lived in Narnia, when we got back through the wardrobe, it seemed to have taken no time at all?" "Go on," said Susan. "I think I'm beginning to understand." "And that means," continued Edmund, "that once you're out of Narnia, you have no idea how Narnian time is going. Why shouldn't hundreds of years have passed in Narnia, while only 1 year has passed for us in England?" "By Jove, Ed!" By Jove is Peter's catchphrase, by the way, if anybody wasn't here yesterday. I expect we're going to be hearing a lot of Jove and being by Jove from Peter. "By Jove, Ed," said Peter, "I believe you've got it. In that sense, it really was hundreds of years ago that we lived in Cair Paravel. And now we're coming back to Narnia just as if we were Crusaders or Anglo-Saxons or ancient Britons or someone coming back to modern England." "How excited they'll be to see us," began Lucy. But at the same moment, everyone else said, "Hush!" or "Look!" for something was happening. There was a wooded point on the mainland a little to their right, and they all felt sure that just beyond the point must be the mouth of the river. And now, round that point there came into sight a boat. When it had cleared the point, it turned and began coming along the channel toward them. There were 2 people on board, one rowing, the other sitting in the stern and holding a bundle that twitched and moved as if it were alive. Both these people seemed to be soldiers. They had steel caps on their heads and light shirts of chainmail. Their faces were bearded and hard. The children drew back from the beach into the wood and watched without moving a finger. Here we can see the mysterious vessel and its twitching bundle arriving at the island where the Pevensey children seem to be stranded. Hopefully not for long. "This'll do," said a soldier in the stern when the boat had come about opposite to them. "What about tying a stone to his feet, Corporal?" said the other, resting on his oars. "Garn," growled the other. "We don't need that, and we haven't brought one. He'll drown sure enough without a stone, as long as we've tied the cords right." With these words, he rose and lifted his bundle. Peter now saw that it was really alive, and it was in fact a dwarf, bound hand and foot, but struggling as hard as he could. Next moment, he heard a twang just beside his ear, and all at once the soldier threw up his arms, dropping the dwarf into the bottom of the boat, and fell over into the water. He floundered away to the far bank, and Peter knew that Susan's arrow had struck on his helmet. He turned and saw that she was very pale, but was already fitting a second arrow to the string, but it was never used. As soon as he saw his companion fall, the other soldier, with a loud cry, jumped out of the boat on the far side, and he also floundered through the water, which was apparently just in his depth, and disappeared into the woods of the mainland. "Quick, before she drifts!" shouted Peter. "That Susan's quite a crack shot, isn't she? By Jove!" He and Susan, fully dressed as they were, plunged in, and before the water was up to their shoulders, their hands were on the side of the boat. In a few seconds they had hauled her to the bank and lifted the dwarf out, and Edmund was busily engaged in cutting his bonds with the pocket knife. Peter's sword would have been sharper, but a sword is very inconvenient for this sort of work, because you can't hold it anywhere lower than the hilt. When at last the dwarf was free, he sat up, rubbed his arms and legs, and exclaimed, "Well, whatever they say, you don't feel like ghosts." Like most dwarves, he was very stocky and deep-chested. He would have been about 3 feet high if he had been standing up, and an immense beard and whiskers of coarse red hair left little of his face to be seen, except a beak-like nose and twinkling black eyes. "Anyway," he continued, "ghosts or not, you've saved my life, and I'm extremely obliged to you." "But why should we be ghosts?" asked Lucy. "I've been told all my life," said the dwarf, "that these woods along the shore were as full of ghosts as they were of trees. That's what the story is, and that's why, when they want to get rid of anyone, they usually bring him down here, like they were doing with me, and say they'll leave him to the ghosts. But I always wondered if they didn't really drown 'em or cut their throats. I never quite believed in ghosts. But those two cowards you just shot believed all right. They were more frightened of taking me to my death than I was of going." "Oh," said Susan, "so that's why they both ran away." "Eh? What's that?" said the dwarf. "They got away," said Edmund, "to the mainland." "I wasn't shooting to kill, you know," said Susan. She would not like to have anyone to think she could miss at such a short range. Said the dwarf. That's not so good. They may mean trouble later on, unless they hold their tongues for their own sake." "What were they going to drown you for?" asked Peter. "Oh, I'm a dangerous criminal, I am," said the dwarf cheerfully. "But that's a long story. Meantime, I was wondering if perhaps you were going to ask me to breakfast. You've no idea what an appetite it gives one, being executed." Here we can see our dangerous criminal, little person, yes, as long as we're being politically correct, our vertically challenged fellow, freeing himself from his bonds and dreaming of some sort of early morning repast in lieu of, dying. "There's only apples," said Lucy dolefully. "Better than nothing, but not so good as fresh fish," said the dwarf. "It looks as if I'll have to ask you to breakfast instead. I saw some fishing tackle in that boat, and anyway, we must take her round to the other side of the island. We don't want anyone from the mainland coming down and seeing her." "I ought to have thought of that myself," said Peter. "That's right, Peter, you ought to have." The 4 children and the dwarf went down to the water's edge, pushed off the boat with some difficulty, and scrambled aboard. The dwarf at once took charge. The oars were of course too big for him to use, so Peter rowed and the dwarf steered them north along the channel and presently eastward round the tip of the island. From here the children could see right up the river, and all the bays and headlands of the coast beyond it. They thought they could recognize bits of it, but the woods, which had grown up since their time, made everything look very different. When they had come into the open sea to the east of the island, the dwarf took to fishing. They had an excellent catch of pavenders, a beautiful rainbow-colored fish which they all remembered eating in Cair Paravel in the old days. When they had caught enough, they ran the boat into a little creek and moored her to a tree. The dwarf, who was a most capable person, and indeed one meets bad dwarves, I never heard of a dwarf who was a fool, cut the fish open, cleaned them, and said, "Now, what we need next is some firewood." "We've got some up at the castle," said Edmund. The dwarf gave a low whistle. "Beards and bedsteads," he said. "So there really is a castle after all." "It's only a ruin," said Lucy. I think it's quite telling that the dwarf swears by beards and bedsteads. You can learn a lot by what people swear by. Mulric sticking up for the dwarves as an independent species and therefore free from the rigors of political correctness. Welcome, Mulric. The dwarf stared round at all 4 of them with a very cautious expression on his face. "And who on earth—" he began, but then broke off and said, "No matter. Breakfast first. But one thing before we go on. Can you lay your hand on your hearts and tell me I'm really alive? Are you sure I wasn't drowned, and we're not all ghosts together?" When they had all reassured him, the next question was how to carry the fish. They had nothing to string them on, and no basket. They had to use Edmund's hat in the end, because no one else had a hat. He would have made much more fuss about this if he had not by now been so ravenously hungry. At first, the dwarf did not seem very comfortable in the castle. He kept looking round and sniffing and saying, "Looks a bit spooky after all. Smells like ghosts, too." But he cheered up when it came to lighting the fire and showing them how to roast the fresh pavenders in the embers. Eating hot fish with no forks and 1 pocket knife between 5 people is a messy business, and there were several burnt fingers before the meal was ended. But, as it was now 9 o'clock, and they had been up since 5, nobody minded the burns so much as you might have expected. When everyone had finished off with a drink from the well and an apple or so, the dwarf produced a pipe about the size of his own arm, filled it, lit it, blew a great cloud of fragrant smoke, and said, "Now, you tell us your story first. said Peter, "and then we'll tell you ours." "Well," said the dwarf, "as you've saved my life, it is only fair that you should have your own way. But I hardly know where to begin. First of all, I'm a messenger of King Caspian's." "Who's he?" asked four voices all at once. "Caspian the 10th, King of Narnia, and long may he reign," answered the dwarf. "That is to say, he ought to be King of Narnia, and we hope he will. At present he's only king of us old Narnians." "What do you mean by old Narnians, please?" asked Lucy. "Why, that's us," said the dwarf. "We're a kind of rebellion, I suppose." "I see," said Peter. "And Caspian is the chief old Narnian." "Well, in a manner of speaking," said the dwarf, scratching his head. "But he's really a new Narnian himself. A Telmarine, if you follow me." "I don't," said Edmund. "It's worse than the Wars of the Roses," said Lucy. "Oh dear," said the dwarf. "I'm doing this very badly. Look here, I think I'll have to go right back to the beginning and tell you how Caspian grew up in his uncle's court and how he comes to be on our side at all. But it'll be a long story." "All the better," said Lucy. "We love stories." And so the dwarf settled down and told his tale. I shall not give it to you in his words, putting in all the children's questions and interruptions, because it would take too long and be confusing. And, even so, it would leave out some points that the children only heard later. But the gist of the story, as they knew it in the end, was as follows. That brings us to the end of chapter 3. The Noonians. You said it, Ethereal. Not to be confused with the Oldians, or my brother Ian. Well, shall we soldier on? McKinnon Lance says, "These are starting to be a lovely evening tradition." Oh, shucks. Thanks, Lance. Yeah, it's been a joy for me too. I'm having lots of fun. And I hope you are at home too. Here's to you, folks. Happy bedtime. AC Ethereal asked a good question. What's the question? I'll have to scroll up in chat. Will you continue to do this even after quarantine? That's a great question, Ethereal, and the answer is yeah, that's the plan. I've been really enjoying this. I kicked it off maybe, gosh, I guess it must be at least a month ago now. Wild how time flies. But yeah, I've been really enjoying this, and it's a project that I've kind of had on the back burner for a long time, and being locked in my house was just the perfect excuse I needed to finally get off my butt and get it in gear. So the plan is currently, yes, to continue this indefinitely into the future. Chapter 4. The Dwarf Tells of Prince Caspian. Oh, I should also mention that the other videos are available in the video section just up here, and I have a comments or a suggestion box just down there if you have any suggestions for short stories or other novels you might like to hear. And there is in the works a YouTube channel to upload all of the past adventures so that there will be a long-standing archive of our time here together at bedtime. So, I think it's time we should return to the story. Enough of all this meta-narrative about my creative projects. Thanks for asking, though, Ethereal. That's a very good question. Chapter 4. The Dwarf Tells of Prince Caspian. I could do this whole thing in the dwarf's voice, but I think that would be bad for my voice, so I'm not going to do that. I'll just have to imagine me as slightly huskier than I am. Chapter 4. The Dwarf Tells of Prince Caspian. Prince Caspian lived in a great castle in the center of Narnia with his uncle, Miraz, the king of Narnia, and his aunt, who had red hair and was called Queen Pruna Prismia. What color was Uncle Miraz's hair? That's not fair. His father and mother were dead, and the person whom Caspian loved best was his nurse. And though, being a prince, he had wonderful toys which could do almost anything but talk, he liked best the last hour of the day, when the toys had all been put back in their cupboards, and Nurse would tell him stories. Oh my God, guys, we're just like Prince Caspian, and I'm the nurse. He did not care much for his uncle and aunt, But about twice a week his uncle would send for him, and they would walk up and down together for half an hour on the terrace at the south side of the castle. One day, while they were doing this, the king said to him, "Well, boy, we must soon teach you to ride and use a sword. You know that your aunt and I have no children." Children. Yes, it's Old English, so children. "So it looks as if you might have to be king when I'm gone. How shall you like that, eh?" "Well, I don't know, uncle," said Caspian. "Don't know, eh?" said Miraz. "Why, I should like to know what more anyone could wish for." "All the same, I do wish," said Caspian. "What do you wish?" asked the king. I wish I could have lived in the old days," said Caspian. He was only a very little boy at the time. Up till now, King Miraz had been talking in the tiresome way that some grown-ups had, which makes it quite clear that they are not really interested in what you are saying. But now he suddenly gave Caspian a very sharp look. "Eh? What's that?" he said. "What old days do you mean?" "Oh, don't you know, uncle?" said Caspian. "When everything was quite different. When all the animals could talk, and there were nice people who lived in the streams and the trees. Naiads and dryads they were called, and there were dwarfs, and there were lovely little fawns in all the woods. They had feet like goats, and—" "That's all nonsense. For babies," said the king sternly. "Only fit for babies, do you hear?" I love this king. Savage burn on the babies. You're getting too old for that sort of stuff. At your age you ought to be thinking of battles and adventures, not fairy tales." "Oh, but there were battles and adventures in those days," said Caspian. "Wonderful adventures. Once there was a white witch, and she made herself queen of the whole country, and she made it so that it was always winter. And then 2 boys and 2 girls came from somewhere, and so they killed the witch, and they were made kings and queens of Narnia, and their names were Peter and Susan and Edmund and Lucy, and so they reigned forever, so long, and everyone had a lovely time. And it was all because of Aslan." "Who's he?" said Miraz. And if Caspian had been a little older, the tone of his uncle's voice would have warned him that it would be wiser to shut up. But he blabbed on. "Oh, don't you know?" he said. "Aslan is the great lion who comes from over the sea." "Who has been telling you all this nonsense?" said the king in a voice of thunder. Oh, wait, I can do a better voice of thunder. "Who has been telling you all this nonsense?" said the king in a voice of thunder. Caspian was frightened and said nothing. "Your Royal Highness," said King Miraz, letting go of Caspian's hand, which he had been holding till now, "I insist upon being answered. Look me in the face. Who has been telling you this pack of lies?" "Nurse," faltered Caspian, and burst into tears. "Stop that noise," said his uncle, taking Caspian by the shoulders and giving him a shake. "Stop it, and never let me catch you talking, or thinking either, about those silly stories again. There never were those kings and queens, and how could there be 2 kings at the same time? And there's no such person as Aslan, and there are no such things as lions, and there never was a time when animals could talk. Do you hear?" "Yes, uncle," sobbed Caspian. "Then let's have no more of it," said the king. Then he called to one of the gentlemen-in-waiting, who were standing at the far end of the terrace, and said in a cold voice, "Conduct his Royal Highness to his apartments, and send his Royal Highness's nurse to me at once." That's once in all caps, so you know he's, you know he means business. Scroll down here. Make sure I'm not missing any of the goodness in chat. I love interacting with people. Oh my goodness, it's so nice. It's so nice to talk to people. Next day, Caspian found what a terrible thing he had done. For Nurse had been sent away, without even being allowed to say goodbye to him, and he was told he was going to have a tutor. Caspian missed his nurse very much, and shed many tears. And because he was so miserable, he thought about the old stories of Narnia far more than before. He dreamed of dwarfs and dryads every night, and tried very hard to make the dogs and cats in the castle talk to him. But the dogs only wagged their tails, and the cats only purred. Caspian felt sure that he would hate the new tutor. But when the new tutor arrived about a week later, he turned out to be the sort of person it is almost impossible not to like. He was the smallest, and also the fattest, man Caspian had ever seen. He had a long, silvery pointed beard which came down to his waist, and his face, which was brown and covered with wrinkles, looked very wise, very ugly, and very kind. His voice was grave, and his eyes were so merry that, until you got to know him really well, it was hard to know when he was joking and when he was serious. His name was Dr. Cornelius. Here we have a little rendering of the fattest and shortest man you've ever seen in your life. Looking rather jolly, rather rotund, with a very strange garment on. It's kind of like a big Ziploc bag as far as I can tell. And on the previous page we have a little artist rendering of Caspian's dreams of the naiads and dryads and dwarves and fauns. I understand folks have been having some pretty vivid dreams with this whole isolation business. Maybe tonight we will be graced by some dwarves and dryads. Of all his lessons with Dr. Cornelius, the one that Caspian liked best was history. Up till now, except for Nurse's stories, he had known nothing about the history of Narnia, and he was very surprised to learn that the royal family were newcomers in the country. "It was your Highness's ancestor, Caspian the First," said Dr. Cornelius, "who first conquered Narnia and made it his kingdom. It was he who brought all your nation into the country. You are not native Narnians at all. You are Telmarines. That is, you all came from the land of Telmar, far beyond the western mountains. That is why Caspian the First is called Caspian the Conqueror." "Please, Doctor," asked Caspian one day, "who lived in Narnia before we all came here out of Telmar?" "No men, or very few, lived in Narnia before the Telmarines took it," said Dr. Cornelius. "Then who did my great-great-grandsesters conquer?" "Whom, not who, your Highness," said Dr. Cornelius. "Perhaps it is time to turn from history to grammar." "Oh, please, not yet," said Caspian. "I mean, wasn't there a battle? Why is he called Caspian the Conqueror if there was nobody to fight with him?" "I said there were very few men in Narnia," said the doctor, looking at the little boy very strangely through his great spectacles. For a moment Caspian was puzzled, and then suddenly his heart gave a leap. "Do you mean," he gasped, "that there were other things? Do you mean it was like in the stories? Were there—" "Hush!" said Dr. Cornelius, laying his head very close to Caspian's. "Not a word more. Don't you know your nurse was sent away for telling you about old Narnia? The king doesn't like it. If he found me telling your secrets, you'd be whipped, and I should have my head cut off." "But why?" asked Caspian. "It is high time we turned to grammar now," said Dr. Cornelius in a loud, very silly voice. I added that part myself. Now that's some voice acting. Why, thank you. "Will your Royal Highness be pleased to open Pulverulentus Siccus on the 4th page of his grammatical garden, or the arbor of accidents pleasantly opened to tender wits?" After that it was all nouns and verbs till lunchtime, but I don't think Caspian learned much. He was too excited. He felt sure that Dr. Cornelius would not have said so much unless he meant to tell him more sooner or later. In this he was not disappointed. A few days later his tutor said, "Tonight I am going to give you a lesson in astronomy. At dead of night 2 noble planets, Tarva and Alambil, will pass within 1 degree of each other. Such a conjunction has not occurred for 200 years. And your Highness will not live to see it again. It will be best if you go to bed a little earlier than usual. When the time of the conjunction draws near, I will come and wake you." This didn't seem to have anything to do with old Narnia, which was what Caspian really wanted to hear about, but getting up in the middle of the night is always interesting, and he was moderately pleased. When he went to bed that night, he thought at first that he would not be able to sleep, but he soon dropped off, and it seemed only a few minutes before he felt someone gently shaking him. He sat up in bed and saw that the room was full of moonlight. Dr. Cornelius, muffled in a hooded robe and holding a small lamp in his hand, stood by the bedside. Caspian remembered at once what they were going to do. He got up and put some clothes on. Although it was a summer night, he felt colder than he had expected, and was quite glad when the doctor wrapped him in a robe like his own and gave him a pair of warm, soft buskins for his feet. A moment later, both muffled so that they could hardly be seen in the dark corridors, and both shod so that they made almost no noise, master and pupil left the room. Caspian followed the doctor through many passages and up several staircases. Oh, guys, Prometheus went to sleep while I was reading. Let's see if we can't. Hello! Welcome back, Prometheus. Caspian followed the doctor through many passages and up several staircases, and at last, through a little door in a turret, they came out upon the leads. On one side were the battlements, and on the other a steep roof. Below them, all shadowy and shimmery, the castle gardens. Above them, stars and moon. Presently they came to another door, which led into the great central tower of the whole castle. Dr. Cornelius unlocked it, and they began to climb the dark, winding stair of the tower. Caspian was becoming excited. He had never been allowed up this stair before. It was long and steep, but when they came out on the roof of the tower, and Caspian had got his breath, he felt that it had been well worth it. Away on his right he could see, rather indistinctly, the western mountains. On his left was the gleam of the great river, and everything was so quiet that he could hear the sound of the waterfall at Beaversden, a mile away. There was no difficulty in picking out the 2 stars they had come to see. They hung rather low in the southern sky, almost as bright as 2 little moons, and very close together. "Are they going to have a collision?" he asked in an awestruck voice. "Nay, dear prince," said the doctor, and he too spoke in a whisper. "The great lords of the upper sky know the steps of their dance too well for that. Look well upon them. Their meeting is fortunate, and means some great good for the sad realm of Narnia. Tarva, the lord of victory, salutes Alambil, the lady of peace. They are just coming to their nearest." "It's a pity that tree gets in the way," said Caspian. "We'd really see better from the west tower, though it is not so high." Dr. Cornelius said nothing for about 2 minutes, but stood still with his eyes fixed on Tarva and Alambil. Then he drew a deep breath and turned to Caspian. "There," he said, "you have seen what no man now alive has seen, nor will see again. And you are right. We should have seen it even better from the smaller tower. I brought you here for another reason." Caspian looked up at him, but the doctor's hood concealed most of his face. "The virtue of this tower," said Dr. Cornelius, "is that we have 6 empty rooms beneath us, and a long stair, and the door at the bottom of that stair is locked. We cannot be overheard." "Are you going to tell me what you wouldn't tell me the other day?" said Caspian. "I am," said the doctor. "But remember, you and I must never talk about these things except here, on the very top of the great tower." "No, that's a promise," said Caspian. "But please do go on." I want to turn back for a second and show you this lovely and rather spooky drawing. Oh my god, is Doctor going to kill him? No, it's Cornelius, not Kevorkian. Don't be ridiculous. Here we can see Dr. Cornelius and Caspian standing beneath the twin lights of Tarva and Alambil. Rather spooky. They kind of look like druids in their robes with the teeth of the castle next to them. "Listen," said the doctor. All you have heard about old Narnia is true. It is not the land of men. It is the country of Aslan, the country of the waking trees and visible naiads, of fauns and satyrs, of dwarves and giants, of the gods and the centaurs, of talking beasts. It was against these that the first Caspian fought. It is you Telmarines who silenced the beasts and the trees and the fountains, and who killed and drove away the dwarves and fauns, and are now trying to cover up even the memory of them. The king does not allow them to be spoken of."
"Oh, I do wish we hadn't," said Caspian, "and I am glad it was all true, even if it is all over."
"Many of your race wish that in secret," said Dr. Cornelius.
"But, Doctor," said Caspian, "why do you say my race? After all, I suppose you're a Telmarine too."
"Am I?" said the doctor.
"Well, you're a man, anyway," said Caspian.
"Am I?" repeated the doctor in a deeper voice, at the same moment throwing back his hood so that Caspian could see his face clearly in the moonlight. All at once Caspian realized the truth, and felt that he ought to have realized it long before. Dr. Cornelius was so small and so fat, and had such a very long beard. Two thoughts came into his head at the same moment. One was a thought of terror. "He's not a real man, not a man at all. He's a dwarf, and he's brought me up here to kill me." Oh, seems like Caspian and Kay Nelson think alike. Oh, that's Kay Nelson with the snidey remarks. Welcome, Kay. Good to have you. Two thoughts came into his head. One was that the dwarf was going to kill him. The other was sheer delight. Santa! Oh my God, is it Santa? There's a precedence for that in Narnia. Santa's real. There are real dwarfs still, and I've seen one at last. "So you've guessed it in the end," said Dr. Cornelius, "or guessed it nearly right. I'm not a pure dwarf. Dwarf. I have human blood in me too. Many dwarves escaped in the great battles and lived on, shaving their beards and wearing high-heeled shoes and pretending to be men. Are these dwarves or drag queens? I'm confused. They have mixed with your Telmarines. I am only one of those, only a half-dwarf. And if any of my kindred, the true dwarves, are still alive anywhere in the world, doubtless they would despise me and call me a traitor. But never in all these years have we forgotten our own people and all the other happy creatures of Narnia, and the long-lost days of freedom." I'm sorry, Doctor," said Caspian. "It wasn't my fault, you know." Oh, we got some Telmarine apologists going on. "I'm not saying these things in blame of you, dear prince," answered the doctor. "You may well ask why I say them at all, but I have two reasons. Firstly, because my old heart has carried these secret memories so long that it aches with them and would burst if I did not whisper them to you. But secondly, for this, that when you become king you may help us, for I know that you also, Telmarine though you are, love the old things." I do, said Caspian. "But how can I help?" "You can be kind to the poor remnants of the dwarf people, like myself. You can gather learned magicians and try to find a way of awakening the trees once more. You can search through all nooks and wild places of the land to see if any fauns or talking beasts or dwarves are perhaps still alive and hiding." "Do you think there are any?" asked Caspian eagerly. "I don't know. Oh, I don't know," said the doctor with a deep sigh. "Sometimes I am afraid there can't be. I have been looking for traces of them all my life. Sometimes I have thought I heard a dwarf drum in the mountains. Sometimes at night in the woods I thought I had caught a glimpse of fauns and satyrs dancing a long way off. But when I came to the place, there was never anything there. I have often despaired, but something always happens to start me hoping again. Oh, I don't know.
But at least you can try to be a king like the High King Peter of old, and not like your uncle." "Then it's true about the kings and queens, and about the White Witch?" said Caspian.
"Certainly it is true," said Cornelius. "Their reign was the golden age in Narnia, and the land has never forgotten them."
"Did they live in this castle, Doctor?"
"Nay, my dear," said the old man. "This castle is a thing of yesterday. Your great-great-grandfather built it, and when the 2 sons of Adam and the 2 daughters of Eve were made kings and queens of Narnia by Aslan himself, they lived in the castle of Cair Paravel. No man alive has seen that blessed place, and perhaps even the ruins of it have now vanished. But we believe it was far from here, down at the mouth of the great river, on the very shore of the sea."
"Ugh," said Caspian with a black shudder. "Do you mean in the Black Woods? Sorry, not with a black shudder, just a regular shudder, but the woods are black. Do you mean in the Black Woods, where all the you know, the ghosts live? The ghosts?"
Dwarves and drag queens. What's the difference, really? I dig the creepy voice. Dr. Creepy. Yeah, this Cornelius fellow, he's seen some stuff, man. He is wizened.
"Your Highness speaks as you have been taught," said the doctor, "but it is all lies. There are no ghosts there. That is a story invented by the Telmarines. Your kings are in a deadly fear of the sea, because they can never quite forget all the stories that of Aslan coming from over the sea. They don't want to go near it, and they don't want anyone else to go near it. So they have let great woods grow up to cut the people off from the coast. But because they have quarreled with the trees, they are afraid of the woods. And because they are afraid of the woods, they imagine that they are full of ghosts. And the kings and great men, hating both the sea and the wood, partly believe these stories and partly encourage them. They feel safer if no one in Narnia dares to go down to the coast and look out to sea, toward Aslan's land and the morning and the eastern end of the world."
There was a deep silence between them for a few minutes. Then Dr. Cornelius said,
"Come, we have been here long enough. It is time to go down and go to bed."
"Must we?" said Caspian. "I'd like to go on talking about these things for hours and hours and hours."
"Someone might begin looking for us if we did that," said Dr. Cornelius.
And that is the end of chapter 4. Bango, bango, bongo. Oh, I love those stories within the stories. The one that Aravis told in The Horse and His Boy about her escape from her arranged marriage, and this one, the sort of tale within a tale is I don't know why, I find it so captivating. And I hope you did too, dear listeners at home. This is great. I think I'm starting to parse out some colonizers' regret themes in the works of this particular novel. It's always fascinating to see how these things translate. Maybe I'm reading into it. I suppose we'll have to wait and see. Thanks for tuning in, everybody, and I hope you have a really great night. We'll be back tomorrow evening at 8:30 with chapters 5 and possibly 6. And I wish you all very, very sweet dreams. And may the stars of your celestial sphere also align. And, let's all dream of dwarves and dryads, too. I feel like they could use a signal boost in these trying times. So, good night, moon, and good night, stars. Good night, trucks, and good night, cars. Good night, shoes, and good night, hats. Good night, dogs, and good night, cats. Good night to friends and family. Good night to you and to me. Oh my gosh, how can they send you fan art? Oh my god, yeah. You can send me fan art to colin.maddie@gmail.com. Oh my god, fan art? Oh my heart. Wowie, wouldn't that be something? Dear friends, Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Sam. If anyone else wants to send me, spam or sign me up for any email lists too, feel free to use that one. That's my personal account, so I'll be sure to get all of your awful coupons for terrible products. But yeah, if you have any suggestions, again, feel free to use the suggestion box down below. If you want to catch up on any videos before I get the YouTube going, take a look at the videos section up above. I think most of The Horse and His Boy is in there, as well as a special short story episode from Ursula K. Le Guin's The Rule of Names that we read last week. So, good night, everybody. Thanks again for tuning in.